Hello everyone, and welcome to Building a Business Case for Employers to Actively Recruit and Retain People Living with Mental Illness. My name is Krista Bennis, and I am a Program Manager in Workplace Mental Health at the Mental Health Commission of Canada. I am very happy to be hosting the webinar with you today and to be able to introduce you to our presenters who will share their research on understanding the business case from an employer's point of view that examines how a strategic decision to actively recruit and retain people from the aspiring workforce addresses urgent business needs and skills shortages. Before I hand the presentation over to them, I'd quickly like to talk about a couple of housekeeping items and then give you a brief overview of the MHCC and the work that we do in this area. I apologize, I'm just forwarding my slides here. Audio is provided in broadcast mode through your computer speakers. You can hear us, but we can't hear you. If you have any questions or comments, please type and submit them through the question and answer chat box on the bottom right of your screen. Note that we will hold most of the questions until the end of the presentation. The webinar is also being recorded. The recording, presentation slides, and links to resources referenced in the presentation will be posted to the webinar archive section of our website in the coming weeks. You can download the presentation slides right now by selecting the resources and clicking on the Download Files button on the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. The Mental Health Commission of Canada leads the development and dissemination of innovative programs and tools to support the mental health and wellness of Canadians. Through our unique mandate from the Government of Canada, the MHCC supports federal, provincial, and territorial governments as well as organizations in the implementation of sound public policy. The Commission was created in 2007 by the federal government as an independent, arm's-length, non-profit organization with a 10-year mandate to develop Canada's first mental health strategy, address stigma and discrimination, build knowledge exchange capacity in Canada, and through an expanded mandate focused on housing and homelessness through the At Home Chez Soi project. MHCC funding has been renewed from Health Canada, and our current 2-year mandate builds on the work we have done and focuses on suicide prevention, addictions and mental health, population-based mental health, engagement with Canadians, provinces, territories, and federal partners. Now, within these 2 priority areas, we have 2 key initiatives that look at recovery and employment, which are the impetus for today's webinar. I'll quickly introduce you to both of these areas. The MHCC has undertaken the concept of recovery, which refers to living a satisfying, hopeful, and contributing life, even if there may be ongoing limitations from mental health problems and illnesses. It refers to a process or journey of healing in which, to the greatest extent possible, people are empowered to make informed choices about the services, treatments, and supports that best meet their needs. This includes understanding a person as a whole and their broad-based goals, which may include treatment, but also look at employment, being connected to a community, and having housing. A recovery-oriented mental health system is organized to support and sustain people throughout this journey. It can be summed up in hope, dignity, and inclusion. But while the concept of recovery is at the heart of the National Mental Health Strategy, and it underpins the work that the Commission does, the Commission recognized that work was needed in this area to ensure it was implemented and utilized across sectors, and our work shifted towards finding ways to work with our many partners in the community around what they needed and were interested in related to recovery. And many of us are working in this area to shift, inspire, and mobilize. At the heart of the recovery orientation is the idea that people set goals and have the opportunity to address their goals. We know that employment is consistently set as one of a person's recovery-oriented goals, which is why the Aspiring Workforce file at the Commission is so important. And its focus is on eliminating barriers to employment for individuals with serious mental illness. We know that employment plays a key role in the recovery of individuals living with a mental illness. It improves their mental health, reduces their need for health services, increases their financial well-being, and creates positive social networks. We also know that labor shortages in Canada are expected to reach 2 million workers by 2031. Yet, The unemployment rates for people living with a severe mental illness can be as high as 70 to 90%. Research shows that individuals living with a disability, including those with a mental illness, are as, if not more, qualified, reliable, loyal, and productive than their colleagues who do not have a disability. In 2013, the Mental Health Commission of Canada released the report, The Aspiring Workforce, Employment and Income for People with Serious Mental Illness. This report and the term aspiring workforce describes those people who, due to mental illness, have been unable to enter the workforce, are in and out of the workforce due to episodic illness, or who wish to return after a lengthy period away. The intent of this project was to identify existing and innovative practices to increase opportunities that will help people living with serious mental illness to secure long-term, meaningful employment and income. Key recommendations from the research identified a greater need for collaboration among 3 levels of government, federal, provincial, and territorial, and removal of systemic barriers for those living with a mental illness to return to work. Use of existing best practices to promote recruitment and retention of individuals living with a mental illness and to reduce stigma associated with mental illness, and the importance of growing innovative programs and practices such as supported employment and social enterprises. In an effort to carry out the recommendations of the Aspiring Workforce Report to promote employment for people living with mental illness and share promising practices for employers, the Commission undertook a project to understand the business case from the employer's point of view that examines how a strategic decision to actively recruit and retain people from the aspiring workforce addresses urgent business needs and skills shortages. To accomplish this, MHCC partnered with a group of researchers from McMaster University and the Institute of Work and Health. And I would like to add that the final report will be available in the coming weeks on our website. I would now like to introduce Rebecca Gurwitz from McMaster University to tell us about the research.
Hi. Thank you for that introduction, Krista. And as Krista mentioned, we're really excited. Thank you for coming to the webinar today. And we're excited to share the findings from this project, which the Mental Health Commission of Canada funded and is literally hot off the press, as Krista mentioned. We're hoping to release, it will be released soon. Also here today to also share findings from the project are Margaret Oldfield, Emil Tompa, and two colleagues from ATB who will also share their perspectives as employers or in an HR department of an organization. And so anyways, I will introduce the project and then pass it along to my colleagues to provide more details of some of our findings. So before I go any further, I just want to acknowledge that this project was an outcome of a very strong multidisciplinary team who contributed and collaborated on this project. And I really think that the richness of what we did and what we found is attributed to the fact that we brought perspectives from health and rehabilitation science, business and management, evaluation and economics, and used all of that to really build this business case. So you can see that we have this very strong team, and obviously not the full team is on the call presenting today, but everyone made important contributions. So our objectives were to explore how opportunities and challenges, to explore the opportunities and challenges for hiring and retaining and supporting people with mental illness across sectors, across organizations, and different types of organizations. We wanted to identify and describe the costs and benefits of hiring, supporting, and accommodating people with mental illness, and also to identify opportunities and strategies for employers to improve their capacity to tap into the aspiring workforce to meet existing business needs. So you can see that these are really lofty objectives given that we had a short time frame of less than 1 year, and therefore in order to in order to meet these objectives, we were only able to do 5 case studies. However, these 5 case studies were very enlightening, and we learned tremendously from this undertaking. So we'll share those findings with you today. But that was a limitation, is that we were only able to explore these issues across 5 different Canadian organizations. We looked for diverse organizations, as I mentioned, and I'll describe this diversity in the next slide. Within each organization, we worked with a champion to identify key stakeholders to collect data with, and our data collection was really focused on two main processes. We did a qualitative interview with each participant focused on their experiences working within the organization, and then separately we did a more structured economic interview focused on their perceptions of the costs and benefits of accommodating a worker with a mental illness, either as an accommodated worker themselves, or as a co-worker of an accommodated worker, or as a manager or supervisor. And we also looked at the costs and benefits to each of these individuals and the organization as a whole. And our stakeholders included workers with mental illness, co-workers, managers and supervisors, and also champions and HR professionals. So we had multiple perspectives represented in our data, and we looked at their perceptions of the experience of people with mental illness working in an organization, and their perceptions of the costs and benefits from these different perspectives. So very rich data collection. This slide here on the screen now is really to show the diversity we sought in these 5 organizations, knowing that we really wanted to represent different Canadian businesses here. So we have different types of businesses, from food services to agricultural to banking and government. We have small, medium, and large organizations, different sectors in terms of public and private, and a consumer-run business, social enterprise. We tried to include both urban and rural organizations. Most of the organizations were for-profit, but we also had a government agency represented. The geographical scope of the organizations included local and provincial, but also one that was national in scope. Some of the organizations had HR departments, some did not. And some were unionized and some were not. So we had quite a diversity represented in these 5 organizations, which I think also strengthens the findings. So I'll turn this over now. I will say one more thing about our recruitment before I turn it over to Margaret to share a little bit about the qualitative findings, and that is that in our recruitment, we focused on organizations that had taken active steps to hire and accommodate and support people living with mental illness, typically from the top of the organization down, but were overall at different stages of this process. So there was an intentional effort to recruit or support people with mental illness within the organization. So I'll turn it over now to Margaret to share some of the qualitative findings.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. I'm going to give you an overview of the qualitative findings, and there's a lot whoops, I've missed a slide, sorry. There's a lot more detail in the report, which, as Krista and Rebecca mentioned, will be coming out fairly soon. These qualitative findings were based on our interviews with workers with mental illness, co-workers, and managers of people who had mental illness about their experiences in their workplaces. And they incorporate aspects of organizations that help retain employees with mental illness. There are also some challenges, so I'll talk about those as well. The first theme in our data is the culture of inclusivity, and this incorporates the idea of psychological safety and respect. Civility is a very important part of that, and the first quote on the left is from a manager in the Organization 1, a small food services business that's a consumer-run organization. He said, people with mental health conditions have been through a lot of abuse in their life, verbal, physical, you name it. So often when people start yelling and are aggressive, that's a trigger for them, and it can cause them to even just walk out of the workplace. So by keeping things more under control, it helps them function better in the workplace. And we also had another element of psychological safety and respect that we noted was check-ins. This was particularly evident in the second organization, another food service business. The owner of the business, when she had weekly staff meetings, did a round robin with all her employees, asking how the last week had gone for them, how they felt about it, and what could change to make that better, how she could change the organization to make it work better for the employees. We also observed when the staff were working together in their kitchen that they were frequently checking in with each other, asking each other how they were, how's it going, how are you, and this wasn't just politeness, this was actually, they were listening, and they were very tuned into each other's moods and feelings, and this was another element of the workplace that really helped people with mental illnesses. They didn't feel any problem with disclosing that they were having a problem at the time. There were, however, some tensions in workplace cultures. One was that the initiatives, as Krista mentioned, or perhaps it was Rebecca mentioned, that the mental health initiatives in workplaces tended to be implemented from the top down. So we found uneven uptake across organizations. And our champion in Organization 5 said, I think that our leaders are on board, but I'm not sure that our management is on board. And that's kind of where it's hit and miss. And she means individual managers. So we found that we observed several workplaces in Organization 5, the government, and found that in some places workers with mental illness were very happy and comfortable about disclosing and talking about their mental illness with their colleagues. And in other places people felt put down, challenged, needing to explain their behavior, not knowing how, very uncomfortable, even to the point of some workplaces being called toxic. So it was a very uneven situation across the organization. We also found something interesting in Organization 5, the trading informal accommodations for high performance. People who got accommodated for mental illness were often described as high performers, and a coworker, in fact, said, I would say if you have a mental illness and you're not a high performer, good luck. We also had workers who said they were grateful for their accommodations and they were working hard to deserve them. So in terms of accommodations for workers with mental illness, we found two kinds, universal support and formal individual accommodations. Universal supports are benefits available to all employees, such as sick leave, and then there were also policies in some organizations, and most of them actually, where people could work at home, work flexible hours, and these were thought to benefit people with mental illness greatly. We also found another kind of universal support that helped people with mental illness who were having trouble with their memory because of their meds and their medications. It was writing procedures down, putting lists of tasks on a wall in a kitchen, for example, or having manuals. That helped people. Informal individual accommodations were quite common, and they require a supportive relationship between a supervisor and a manager. They're arrangements negotiated between these two people. They're generally not put in writing, so this can be a problem, is that the accommodations may not last beyond the job. If the person changes jobs in the organization or if their manager changes, they might lose their accommodation. So by the time we got to Organization 5, we were very curious about why we hadn't heard of any formal accommodations. Only one in the case of a woman who had as part of her return to work, but the accommodations became informal after she was back full-time. And there were 5 reasons that people in Organization 5 gave us for the lack of formal accommodations. The first was that even though you don't have to disclose your illness or your disability to apply for an accommodation, you have to disclose your functional limitations, and your manager needs to know that. So it's pretty easy, and as one participant said, to guess that it's a mental illness. The second reason is that in a large organization, the individual employee and their manager can be far away from the people making the decision about accommodations. And we heard that in Organization 5, managers are now excluded from the accommodations process. It's done by a third-party insurer. So this could make the process intimidating for somebody who was trying to get an accommodation, that they had to go through it alone without their manager, who might very well be supportive. And we also heard that some people still believe that mental illness is not a disability. Disclosure was not an issue in Organizations 1 and 2, small food service organizations, because they had a mandate to hire people with mental illness. But in the other organizations, there wasn't this mandate, so the people weren't specifically hired because they had a mental illness. It was so this made disclosure an issue in these organizations. As the champion in Organization 5 told us, again, there's the bureaucracy around, ask us if you need something, we'll accommodate it. But the onus is on the person to self-identify rather than looking at the systemic barrier that it may cause for someone and change that. It's around, no, you need to identify that you're the exception. So as she was explaining, the accommodation is a solution to an individual, what's seen as an individual problem, and it doesn't necessarily address a systematic barrier. Then there's also the potential for gossip as stigma. A union representative told us, the fear that somebody might gossip can hold people back from disclosing or divulging information that could be really helpful for them. She told a story of a manager who had received a disclosure about mental illness from her employee and then told other people in the workplace about it, breaching confidentiality. So we also asked people about the process of hiring people with mental illness. In the two small organizations, it was by word of mouth. In the food service organization, people would come knowing that it was an organization that hired people with mental illness specifically and say, I would like to work for you. They were then interviewed to see if there was a good fit between them and the team, and then they would be offered a job when one came open. In the second organization, also food services, the cafe and catering business, the owner hired people that she knew or people that other staff knew, and so it was a relational approach. Disclosure in job interviews was very, very rare. We only heard of one case where a woman had disclosed her mental illness in an interview purposely because she felt that her mental illness was an asset for her job performance, and she got the job. One of our participants in Organization 5, the government, pointed out that even though her employer is mandated to hire people in equity groups, including people with disabilities, the hiring wasn't tracked, so they didn't know how they were doing. There are other kinds of management practices that can also help people with mental illness stay on the job. One is cross-training, which occurred in several of the organizations that we studied. Cross-training is training people to do multiple jobs, to do each other's jobs, so that if somebody has a crisis and has to leave suddenly or calls in sick, a coworker can cover their job. This was also enabled by file sharing on databases, which happened in the government, that coworkers could take over from somebody who suddenly had to leave or called in sick, and they all knew a bit about each other's responsibilities, which were geographically based, and they could, if a person from the other person's area called in, they could quickly access the file and then be up to speed on what the person calling in needed. Also in Organization 2, the small food services organization, the catering company, they did everything in their meetings online, so they had access to each other's schedules, and they could easily jump in, change another person's task if the other person felt overwhelmed, needed help, and they could easily rearrange each other's schedules and share the work that way. So those are our qualitative findings, and I'm going to pass the microphone on to Emil.
Okay, thank you. Emil speaking. So I'm going to be presenting the economic evaluation findings, the quantitative findings, but I just thought I would start off with talking a little bit about what I think we mean when we talk about the business case, because it's a terminology that's used a lot but rarely gets defined. So I think of the business case as being a management tool. It's meant to support planning and decision making, particularly around a decision or a change that wants to be implemented, or to understand something that's already in place and to understand its benefits and costs. It often will position the investment in the context of the business objective. So in that respect, it's really often a customized product focused on where a particular organization is at and what it's intending to do, and how the particular initiative they're evaluating may go forward to address some of their key challenges and targets and things like that. So it's really a customized product. So it's really meant to generate support for going forward with a new idea, or sometimes just evaluating the merits of an investment that's already being undertaken, sometimes maybe to expand on it, to add to it, to modify it. It generally will explain what the investment is about, how and who will it impact, the magnitude of those impacts, and then also that cost benefit, the economic evaluation is often built into it as well. And that's where I come in as an economist and do that kind of work, looking at the economic merits of change processes, accommodations, interventions of various sorts at the organizational level. It will often also, if it's for an organization making a decision, will provide some recommendations and how to implement those recommendations. So just then to maybe summarize, the business case is, I would see it as being very company specific. It combines external evidence, sometimes the motivation for some of these changes that are being entertained by an organization are coming from outside knowledge that's been picked up in the industry or from other sources, but they combine it with their internal intelligence to get a sense of what is the merits for us to go forward with this kind of a change process, this accommodation plan, whatever kinds of changes are being entertained or are being evaluated because they're already in place and need to be evaluated. It generally is prepared to promote going forward with that idea, supporting it, taking it underway. And then the financial implications are obviously a part of that, because most organizations can't really move forward on something unless they know what the implications are for their financial bottom line, so the costs and benefits. And so my sense is that what we're presenting in this report that we prepared, the material that Rebecca and Margaret spoke about in terms of best practices, challenges, and doing accommodations are all part of building up that business case. And then my contribution on the economic side, it is another piece of that business case puzzle to help bring it all together, to frame it around the financial bottom line as well. So an economic evaluation then, from an economist perspective, is looking at valuation, looking at material resources that may be implicated in change processes. People time very often is part of those resources as well. And then oftentimes we'll even take a broader approach, not just the organizational approach, but we'll also look at health and intangible benefits to workers, to co-workers, maybe even to society at large at times, right? So we're considering the individual, who's being accommodated in this case, the organizational issues as well, and then sometimes the societal perspective when we think about there might be some external benefits that go beyond just the individual and the organization. So ultimately what we're trying to do when we're doing this economic evaluation is we're trying to maximize the value added when you're using resources. In this case, people time, maybe some purchases or changes that are made to accommodate a worker has some resource implications. What are those costs? What are those benefits? Is the ultimate outcome greater than the input of the investment in that change process or accommodation? So the approach we took with this study was we did some structured interviews with 3 stakeholders or key informants within an organization. We spoke to accommodated workers at these organizations. We spoke to supervisors or managers of accommodated workers, and then we also spoke to co-workers who knew of somebody in their workplace that had been accommodated. These questions that we were asking them were really focused on identifying at the front end just the categories of costs and benefits of the accommodation. So we framed the questions around, what were the implications in terms of costs as a result of this accommodation? What were the implications in terms of impacts and benefits as a result of this accommodation? We did look at monetary type items. We didn't always ask them to frame it in dollars.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Emile. We've just been receiving some word from participants that they'd like you to speak up a bit louder.
Okay, sure, we'll do. Okay, so
thanks so much.
You're welcome. And so we did talk to them about categories of costs and benefits, but we didn't always frame it in dollars and cents. So in some cases, they were intangible benefits, and I'll have a list of them in a subsequent slide, that we knew were important possible outcomes of these accommodations, but they weren't necessarily measurable in dollars and cents, but they were still important to document. And so we tried to capture as many of those benefits, whether they were monetary or non-monetary, in our questioning of the 3 key informants at each of the organizations. Questions we asked with each of those key informants, we asked for them to respond from their own perspective. So the accommodated worker would be talking about their own perspective, the costs and benefits that they perceive. The same with the coworker. And for the managers or supervisors, we asked them to respond on behalf of the organization as well. Now, that doesn't preclude the workers and sometimes even the coworkers speaking to impacts that they perceive that were not out of their own gain or their own pockets or the cost, but maybe attributable to the organization, but they were still giving it from their perspective. The final analysis, we took a 5-year time frame, so we looked at costs and benefits, projected them over a 5-year time frame to get a bigger picture of, over the long run, what are the net benefits, what are the benefit to cost ratios, which I'll give some of those numbers in a subsequent slide. Okay, so in this slide, I just have a list of the costs and benefits that I had in our questionnaire. Not all of these were relevant for every organization, but we started off with this list asking the respondents to identify which of these items they felt were relevant, and then we tried to put some numbers around them if they felt they were relevant. Not necessarily dollars and cents. Sometimes it was just about magnitudes. Was it change a little, a fair amount, or a lot, numbering them from 1 to 10 in terms of importance or magnitude of those impacts. And so we went through each of these categories with each respondent. As you see on this list, some of the benefits are tangible. Income from work, we could measure. Work absences, we could maybe put a price tag on what an absence costs an organization, or replacement costs when a worker is absent. Some of them we were intangible, as I mentioned: job satisfaction, work-life balance, quality of work life, all very, very important outcomes to individuals in the organizations, but they're not necessarily measurable in dollars and cents. We still want to capture them. They're still part of that business case. In this next slide, then, I have just some summary information about our analyses, and I'll go through. We did cost-benefit analyses, or benefits-cost analyses, for 4 of the 5 workplaces that we visited. We did one for the small cafe that was a social enterprise. The accommodated worker that we spoke to there was a chef, and when the manager was away, he served as an assistant manager as well. This person worked 20 to 30 hours a week. The person suffered from epilepsy and serious depression at times, so one of the accommodations the person had was the manager would write down some of the tasks. We had recollection problems if it was just an oral list of items that needed to be done. They would also run through the tasks the day before, so the repetition helped this person as well with memory and recall of what needed to get done. Sometimes they would text each other with reminders and regular check-ins as well to make sure they're on top of what needs to get done, giving that extra support. We did our benefits cost ratio from the organizational perspective, but we also were asking workers about the benefits and costs to them. So the first item in that left-hand column we see at the bottom in red is 9.45 is the benefits to cost ratio for the worker over a 5-year time frame. So we were looking at the costs that the worker incurred. Some of it was just their own time after hours. They were putting in extra time to help sort things out that were not being paid for. Sometimes just some planning activities for thinking about what needs to be done the next day, spend some time on that on their own. So there were some costs. And then the benefits were really largely around the extra income that they were earning as a result of being able to sustain a reasonably full-time job for quite a long period of time. This person had been working in that position for 8 years. So for the organizational perspective in that social enterprise, a small cafe, the net benefit was $55,000, almost $55,600, and the benefit to cost ratio for the organization was 2.25. And for those of you who aren't economists or understand these ratios, anything over 1 means that the benefits exceed the cost. So a 1-to-1 ratio would mean the cost and benefits are equal. When it goes over 1, like this, 2.25 means that the benefits are 2.25 or 2.25 times larger than the cost. So really great outcome there for both the organization and obviously very great outcome for the worker, where they were in much better situation, having a long-term sustainable job alternative. I think this particular worker, she was actually on social assistance before taking up this job. So this has really changed her life, significant change. The next one in the column of small catering company, that was a for-profit catering company. Both Rebecca and Margaret spoke about those organizations and some of the qualitative findings from that. The person we interviewed for the position, he was a dishwasher. He did some food prep and serving as well when they had catering events. This person also worked about 30 hours per week. The person suffered from bipolar and also had a learning disability. Some of the accommodations that were made for him were small things, like just allowing him to sit when he's doing his work rather than standing, when dishwashing or food prep, had their phone available to them because they had some family responsibilities as well, so that they could access their phone during work time. A flexible pay schedule. Sometimes this person needed money in advance of payday, and the employer would provide that money in advance. Support with even applications. The person at one point had some problems with their housing and were about to lose their housing because they needed to fill out a lot of forms, and that was something that the owner of the enterprise helped out with. And just assistance with getting to appointments and things like that. Just support that goes beyond just support within the workplace. But there was a very small organization, obviously, that helped people beyond just in the workplace. So for the worker, the worker's net benefit over a 5-year time frame was $30,000, and the benefits cost ratio was over 4.23. So really great outcome for the worker. In this case, also the worker had been on social assistance prior to taking up this job. And the person had been in the job for quite some time. It was the oldest, most senior employee of the organization, the first person that's been hired by the owner. For the organization, really great outcome as well. The net benefit was $64,000 and a benefit to cost ratio of 1.92. So again, a really good positive outcome for the organization as well. The financial company, the person we looked at who was being accommodated was a solutions analyst. They worked full-time hours. They'd been with the organization for quite some time. This person had OCD and 4 other long-term mental health conditions as well. So a battery of diagnoses that were affecting this worker's mental health state. The measures that they had were soft measures, mostly patience and extra time that the managers and colleagues were giving in, check-ins to make sure the person was doing well. They were also allowed to have 2 screens, which was unusual at this organization. This person was really detail-oriented. It was very super productive. Having 2 screens helped make that happen, which was an accommodation for this person because it was the norm at the organization. The person worked from home sometimes, had some flexible hours, and really largely capitalized on a reasonably generous sick days opportunity that was a universal accommodation that was available to all workers. The worker, in the response to some of the costs and benefits, had not identified dollar value types of costs, and most of the benefits they identified were intangible, such as job satisfaction, the quality of their life at work, and the organizational citizenship, the commitment they had to the organization was really enhanced because they felt really great about being accommodated and working for this organization. For the organization itself, a very good outcome. The net benefit was $210,000. Really large outcome, and for over 5 years, a 7.4 benefit to cost ratio. Largely because of the productivity of this person was really incredible. He was or she was a top performer, doing very well in this organization, had won awards for their performance. Great investment of very small dollars and cents for the organization to invest in this person for amazing outcomes in terms of productivity, for the organization. So really worthwhile investment for them. The last one, which is a large government agency, the accommodated worker that we were looking at was an inspector. They worked full-time. They really mostly capitalized on some of the universal kind of benefits that are available to all people in that organization, taking advantage of sick days, short-term disability, and long-term disability, as well as vacation time when they needed time away from work to recover. There was also family, medical leave, and then the supervisors and managers also had regular check-ins with this worker when they were having a particular crisis. This person suffered from anxiety and serious depression as well. So had sometimes panic attacks that happened at work where they'd have to leave and take a sick day. So for the worker, really good outcomes. The 5-year net benefit was $67,000, over 12 in terms of benefit to cost ratio. For the organization as well, this was a real professional person, had been with the organization for a long time. Lots of investment had been put into training for this person. The net benefit was over $200,000 and a benefits cost ratio of 7.81. So as you can see from all the 4 cases that we took it to sort of an economic evaluation framework, positive outcomes on the worker side in terms of benefits cost ratios, positive outcomes for the employer side in terms of benefits cost ratios. In this next slide then, I list some of the intangible benefits noted by each of the respondents in this organization. These are the benefits for the organization, so these were coming from the supervisor and manager that was being interviewed, and sometimes also from the workers and the co-workers, but were benefits that were of value to the organization. I won't go through them there in detail, but you can see the list there, very important things for the organization to think about in terms of its reputation, citizenship of the workers, the commitment, the job satisfaction, quality of work, like those kinds of all very important organizational outcomes. And then the next slide here is the intangible benefits for the accommodated worker. These were coming from the workers interview, the worker that was being accommodated. They also identified quite a number of intangible benefits in each of the cases that we were looking at. So lots of things that we couldn't quantify but were of importance to document that build up the business case as well. So I will leave it at that to pass it over to, I guess it's Rebecca who will summarize.
Yeah, and I won't take too long here, but just to overall, between the qualitative and the economic data, we can very clearly say that attending to a healthy workplace culture is critical to supporting diverse needs of workers. This isn't really a new finding. I think most organizations are aware of this, but the findings here really highlight how important that workplace culture is for supporting people with mental illness in the workplace. Many workers with mental illness do rely on these informal processes for securing workplace accommodations, so that's really important to be aware of that these formalized accommodation processes are not sort of the first attempt or the first strategy that employers and managers go to. They sort of seek out informal arrangements as their starting point. But most important here is that the return on investment for taking steps to accommodate and support workers with mental illness in diverse settings from multiple perspectives is really compelling, that across the organizations, the economic and the qualitative data really support that this is well worth the effort, and that organizations and individuals are benefiting from these efforts. We do have some recommendations that are also going to be outlined in the report that really stem from these findings. And in the interest of time, I won't go through them in too much detail here, just to say, as I've already said, this emphasis on workplace culture is really important. There is a need, because workers and managers are relying on these informal arrangements, it's really important to offer and strengthen the supports and benefits that are available to all employees. Things like, when possible, ensuring that there is flexibility in how, where, and when people work is really important. That's not, not everybody in an organization can work from home. Some jobs are not really conducive to that, but really try to build in flexibility when possible is important. And there's a real need to look at how work units operate and ensuring that support is built into how work teams, work units operate. The other thing is, because of the reliance on this informal accommodation arrangements, there is a strong recommendation that even though they are informal, to have them documented in writing so that they can be sustained during organizational change and organization restructuring. So those are an overview of the recommendations, and I just want to make sure that we leave time for the next speakers, who I will turn it over to right now.
Hi, it's Carrie Lee Snatinchuk, and I work at ATB Financial. I'm the Director for Enterprise Culture and Development, so I lead the strategy around...
Sorry to interrupt. Carolee, your connection's a bit fuzzy. I'm not sure if there's something on your end that would be impacting that sound, but I just wanted to let you know on the front end.
Okay, thanks. I can try and speak a bit louder. Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So yeah, I lead the mental health strategy, the inclusion and diversity strategy, and the talent strategy at ATB. And ATB is an Alberta-based financial institution. We employ about 5,400 people, and we have about 700,000 Albertans as our customers. We have branches and agencies in over 243 communities, and we've been around since 1938. And I'll let my colleague Tara introduce herself as well.
Good morning, this is Tara Adams. I'm the Wellness Manager for ATB. Carrie Lee did a great description of our company, and yeah, we'd like to share a little bit about our wellness strategy and inclusion strategy and our participation in the case study.
Yeah, so I thought we'd start with talking about what makes an organization well and inclusive, which is something we asked ourselves a number of years ago. So we know that we can measure these things when we see less absenteeism, creating an inclusive environment, having a supported strategy, that's top-down and bottom-up, moving from awareness to behaviors and action, having wellness as a big picture, so not just physical health, but there's a number of elements there, and Tara will speak to that later. Having consistent messages and experiences, so it's not very specific to one manager or one area. We want something to occur across the organization when it's beneficial, especially when we talk about the context of mental health, and role modeling at all levels. So leaders, champions, networks, peers, all of that is where we expect some role modeling to occur. So we have two strategic areas and one goal, be the place to work. And we're a customer, we call ourselves a customer-obsessed organization. So everything that we do within the organization leads to results and better experiences for Albertans, which are our customers. We believe that you can be your best self and true self every day at work. So that's the goal of any strategy that we use at ATB. And how do we know when an organization is inclusive and well? So we test this, and we know that when ATB is a safe place, and people say it's safe, it's inclusive and well. When people say that they can be themselves at work, it's also inclusive and well. When people are doing their best work, this also is an indicator. And it's not just a work thing. It's a work and home and life in general piece. So we really look at those through a variety of metrics. these are the metrics that we use. So we gather engagement survey data every year. We have very high compliance with completing the engagement survey. I believe, and Tara can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's hovering around 95%. We run a health and wellness survey, so we specifically ask questions around health and wellness. We have campaign and challenge activities that we test the participation rates, and we track those. We also track our utilization rates around things like a wellness account. We have benefits and claims data around long-term disability, short-term disability, and we have a health risk assessment that we use. We've partnered with an external organization to run that, and we're in only our first year of that. And Tara, I'll let you do the next slide.
Hi, and I can see from the chat that the phone line might not be totally clear, and I don't think we can change that right now, so I'm going to speak up really loud. I think that, you know, in the beginning of any strategy or portfolio focusing on wellness, inclusion, or mental health, you do need to start with awareness. I think Carrie Lee and I, through the last few years, can say that we have a broad acceptance that ATB cares about our team members, and we are very aware and shine a bright light on our mental health strategy. And now we're evolving into a lot more action. And the best word that Carrie Lee used just now was role modeling. So we believe that all behavior is contagious, whether we're thinking about our mental health behaviors, our inclusion or wellness behaviors. We do a lot of work connecting to the senior leaders across our business, across our province. We also have a wellness leadership committee where we have a representative from every department come together and talk about our strategies, our portfolios, and how they can be a role model and a leader in their own area. We also have a large network of what we call wellness champions, more at the grassroots, ground level. So we are in a big transition right now from a lot of awareness campaigns, a lot of talk, hopefully moving into more behavior-based campaigns and metrics. And Carrie Lee, can you advance the slide? So what we're planning for the next year are the following 6 major enterprise-wide campaigns. We believe that when you focus on energy, that it is infinite, and so there are certain kinds of buckets of energy. Of one, of course, is your mental health and mental energy, but the others include your physical energy, emotional, spiritual energy, and then, of course, we work at a financial institution, so we'd also like to work on our financial wellness. So we will have an enterprise-wide campaign for 1 quarter at a time, and those will be the focuses. In addition, for about 5 or 6 years now, we've had 2 annual mental health campaigns. One is called Not Myself Today. It's every May. It's quite popular. And the second is called National Depression Screening Day in October. These are, after these few years consecutively, these are things that team members look forward to and that we have a wide level of engagement on.
Yeah, and to just elaborate a bit on the mental health campaign, we were early adopters for the Not Myself Today campaign, and in particular we focus on leaders for that campaign. So we give leaders a toolkit of ways to host, not just host group discussions, but also one-on-one chats and tools to kind of address signs and symptoms, which is often the biggest question we get from leaders. What am I looking for? And we're moving that into a more peer-driven campaign now after 5 years to have people be more connected to the materials and take accountability for it, whether they are a leader of a big team or an individual contributor. So it's moved from focus on leaders and having them take full responsibility to deliver these campaigns in their specific areas to a more peer-based campaign. And we feel that it's going okay. We need a little bit of we need a little bit more participation from peers, and we're working on that. And then also the mental health campaign that is called National Depression Screening Day, it just passed, and we're really happy to report that we had way more people participate this year. We did a number of webinars, not webinars, we did a webinar, and we did a live panel discussion, with experts from Suicide Prevention, Calgary Counseling Centre, and the CMHA here in Calgary. And we hosted a talk, and it was well received and well attended. That we'll probably continue to do. It's a very quick, anonymous online test. And Tara, do you want to go ahead?
Sure. This might be something a little bit interesting for the folks on the line in that when you go to any corporate wellness conferences in the last year or two, there is a strong push and focus on financial wellness. So it's not because we work at a bank that we are including this. However, obviously there is a strong focus and a lot of financial wellness benefits for team members who work at a bank. But if you think about this story, if you knew someone who couldn't pay the rent or couldn't pay their mortgage or couldn't buy groceries, how do you think that would impact their mental health and stress level and, of course, physical health? And so often when you're thinking from a corporate wellness perspective, you could put together the most amazing, innovative, beautiful wellness campaign, but if someone is sitting at their desk thinking, I don't know how I'm going to buy groceries tonight, they're really not going to care. They're really not going to be able to think about the other pieces in their big picture of wellness if their financial wellness is suffering. And so ATB is about to engage on a really holistic view of financial wellness and financial health, not only because there's a lot of benefits to working at a bank, but because this, in fact, will support the mental health culture within our organization.
Thanks, Tara. And Tara, I just got your little note here about one of the other things that we get a request for from leaders and peers alike is a first aid kit. So a first aid kit around mental health. So tell me what I can and cannot do as a leader and a team member to support mental health and mental wellness in the organization. And that is definitely something we hear over and over again. And we feel that we've yet. So I want to leave you, and Tara and I want to leave you with this question, and we have a few ideas around it as well. How can we both individually and as an organization be more inclusive? And so one of the things that we work on at ATB is to reduce the levels of bias. So it's not enough to know what biases are or even recognize that you have them. We all need the tools to identify what we might do when we encounter our biases. And around mental illness, this is particularly important. Or when we know a scenario may trigger these biases. So an example, this is a bit outside of mental health, but our board went from 16% female to 50% female in 3 years. And that was more about looking at the pool of candidates for the board rather than just specifically saying we're only going to put a female in this place. So if you can work with those biases, you can usually overcome them. Other things are at meetings and presentations, we ensure that we have a good representation from a diverse pool, cultural diversity, perspective diversity, gender diversity, and so on. In our policies and procedures, we try to review them as frequently as possible for bias. We invite a diverse group of people to provide, to be speakers, guest speakers, or lecturers. We also consider things like the timing and scheduling of meetings and who attends those meetings. So these are also places where bias can hide in organizations. If an organization's performance management systems were stereotype-free, if they reflected attributes, characteristics, and behaviors of all talent across all dimensions, then the workplace would truly be inclusive, and we work towards that at ATB. So any last words, Tara?
Yeah, and I'm sorry about the phone line, folks, but we'll do our best to speak really loudly. I think the last thing I would say in the last couple of weeks at ATB, so just a current development and I think evolution of the work that Carrie Lee and I and others have been doing at ATB, we've had a number of senior leaders share a personal story about their mental health or struggles with mental illness through our internal community platforms. And I would say that when you can have leaders or coworkers stand up and share in whatever way is healthy and comfortable for them, that is where we get the best feedback from our work. So the national annual campaigns are fantastic and lay a good groundwork. However, the senior leaders posting and sharing a story of their struggle with mental health or mental illness really sets a cascade of conversation and a clear message that it's okay to share your story. So that's just a recent development in the last few weeks and months at ATB that I wanted to share.
Well, thank you so much to our speakers, Rebecca, Margaret, Emile, Carolee, and Tara. We're very excited about the results of this research, and as Carolee and Tara were saying, that all behavior is contagious, and we hope that by sharing this information, especially from the employer perspective, that other employers will be encouraged to get on board and make some of these changes into their workplace and make them more accommodating for all individuals, including those with a mental illness. I realize that we are closing in at 1 o'clock, so we take a few questions, but we encourage everyone to reach out to the panelists for additional feedback or questions that you have for them. I will post the contact information. So I just want to return to some of the questions we've received already. What were the reasons given by the organizations for wanting to hire persons with a mental health condition? I'll turn it over to the speakers, to whoever wants to handle that.
Sorry, I can. It's Rebecca here. I've already typed an answer because I saw we were running out of time here, but really there were different reasons. So for some organizations, it was really part of their mandate and their reason for being, whereas other organizations identified a need within their organization and were taking steps to actively address the needs of their current employees with mental illness, and then thinking about how that would relate to hiring. So it was more done reverse. And many of those organizations had already been involved in mental health commission initiatives, and there was typically a champion on staff, typically in HR or high-up management, who was sort of really pushing these efforts forward.
Thank you, Rebecca. The next question we have here is, how did the research project define mental illness? Did this include people who suffered from mental illness episodes such as burnout, major depression, or are we talking of people suffering of permanent mental illness such as bipolar or anxiety disorder?
I can take that one as well. That was a really big discussion within our team. We really were trying to focus on the aspiring workforce, so people with serious mental illness who, without these steps and accommodations, would typically be unemployed. And that was really captured most readily in the first two organizations. We had a hard time recruiting people who would typically be unemployed and unable to access the workforce, because we were looking for people who were currently employed. We were really trying to look for people who were not experiencing work stress or distress at work, so not a mental illness caused by work per se, but more of a long-standing mental illness that may be episodic in nature, but long-standing and something they had been dealing with most of their life.
Thanks, Rebecca. So we'll close at this point as we're now at a little after 1. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and thank you so much to all of the presenters. I have the contact information up on this slide. Please feel free to reach out to any of us if you have any questions or concerns following the webinar today. Thank you again.
Thank you.